Today we're discussing the anatomy of the lungs. Now, they aren't just bags of air, they're actually more like high-tech pyramids, I guess, that are tucked inside your rib cage. So that's what we're going to do today. We're going to sort of break down the lungs using mind maps and metaphors to help you really understand and make anatomy and physiology simple again. So here are the learning objectives for this video, and let's just get cracking. Right, let's start off by orienting you to the lungs in the body and the positioning. So at the very top, we've got the apex of the lung, and this is the superior region, whereas the opposite end is considered the base, and this is near the diaphragm. Now look at the diaphragm, that's sort of that orangish line that you have. It looks like a dome, because that's exactly what the diaphragm looks like. It's like a dome-shaped muscle that assists the lungs with breathing processes and respiration, right? So the lungs are pyramid shaped, right? But they're also paired. So we've got 1 and 2. We've got the left and right lungs. Now they are attached by trachea and the bronchi, but even though they're paired organs, they're not exactly the same on both sides. There are actually some distinct differences that you need to be aware of. The first one is that the right lung is actually shorter and wider, okay? And then the left lung is actually longer and leaner. Okay, now how do you remember that? This is how I remember it. I think of a celebrity. So the right lung to me is like Danny DeVito. You know how he's like short and stalky and, you know, has more power, I guess. I see him as strong. So that's your right lung. And then the left lung, to me, I think of Nicole Kidman. You know how she's very long and lean? And I think of her as the right lung because there's this discrepancy with the right and left lung. The right is shorter and wider, and the left lung is longer and leaner. And you can see it at the bottom where the diaphragm is depicted. You can see that the right lung is a little bit askew compared to the left lung, right? So that's what you want to sort of remember. All right. Now, given that the left lung is longer and leaner, guess what? It's going to occupy less volume, right, than the right lung, because that's going to have a little bit more girth to it. Okay, so that's what you want to remember. All right, and then we've got this cardiac notch, and you can see that in the left lung area, and this is where the heart sort of fits in there. So the left lung also allows for that little indentation. Okay, let's see, what else do we have here? Oh, don't forget that we have pleurae that are cover the surface of the lungs. They're these thin sheaths that cover, and they actually help attach the lungs to the mediastinal, I can't say that word to save my life, surface, so that it helps sort of keep things in place, okay? Now, the other thing that you want to remember is the left lung has 2 lobes, because remember it's longer and leaner, and then the right lung, or Danny DeVito, has 3 lobes. You want to remember that also, okay, because that also creates a difference in anatomy. And in the right lung, we've got the superior, middle, and inferior lobe, and then obviously on the left, we've only got 2 lobes, right? So there's a superior and an inferior. It doesn't have that middle lobe. Okay. Now, the costal surface of the lungs, obviously we know that, borders the ribs. That's another thing you want to remember. And I think that's it for this slide. Let's move on. So let's look a little deeper into the lungs. You know, we've sort of covered a global view of the lungs, but let's look at the respiratory pathway, because it will help you delineate the actual anatomy inside, like from the trachea to the bronchus, bronchi, bronchioles, and then eventually alveolus. Quite a mouthful, honestly, but let's give it a go here. We're going to try to take a journey deep into the lungs, basically following how air travels through these internal structures. So you know that once inside the lungs, the air goes to the left or right. Right has 3 lobes, superior, middle, inferior. Left again has superior and inferior, only 2 lobes. So each lobe is then divided into bronchopulmonary segments, which are further divided into pulmonary lobules. Okay, from there, air flows through the bronchi, and it begins with the secondary lobar bronchi and then the tertiary segmental bronchi. And then these become even smaller, forming bronchioles. Now, bronchioles narrow even further, right, into terminal bronchioles, which essentially marks the end of the conducting zone, and then air passes into the respiratory zone in the respiratory bronchioles. This is where gas exchange actually begins, and finally it reaches the alveolar sacs. That's the ultimate destination where oxygen enters the blood and carbon dioxide enters. So that's essentially the amazing inner journey of the air through your lungs. Now, how do you learn this? Well, the best way I found to learn this is you basically take a whiteboard and you do an active recall method. So you know there are about, I don't know, I think there are like 11 steps. So you put 1 through 11 or create boxes, and then just from memory try to write down the pathway. Now, it might be tricky, correct it, but keep going, and you should be able to do it under 60 seconds, actually under 30 seconds if you're a quick writer, but definitely under 60 seconds, and then you've actually mastered it. So there's your study tip for that. All right, so the main thing we're going to talk about now is the blood flow. We already talked about airflow. Now, in blood flow, you really want to think about pulmonary veins and arteries and the distinction. So let's look at the journey of the blood between the heart and the lungs, which is called a pulmonary circulation. So the first thing you want to note is that in the heart, on the right side, we've got deoxygenated blood, which is low in oxygen, high in carbon dioxide. And this returns from the body, carrying all the waste and carbon dioxide, and it goes to the right side of the heart. It enters the right atrium and then moves to the right ventricle. Now, from the right ventricle, it is pumped through the pulmonary arteries and to the lungs. So the pulmonary arteries carry what type of blood? Deoxygenated. That's all the blue arrows, right? Now, in the lungs, something amazing happens. The blood picks up oxygen and releases all the nasty stuff, the carbon dioxide and all the waste. Now, this becomes oxygen-rich blood, which travels back to the heart to the left side, okay? So here we go. We are carrying it out of the lungs, oxygen-rich blood through the pulmonary veins, and there we go, into the left side of the heart, left atrium, left ventricle, and then it's pumped to the rest of the body to deliver oxygen and nutrients. So this is the cycle that continues and keeps your body energized and your organs alive. So remember, pulmonary vein is going to be oxygenated blood. And the way I remember it is vein meaning way into the heart. So it's oxygenated blood. And then pulmonary artery is deoxygenated blood. And there you have it. So what is the role of the nervous system with the lungs and the bronchus, bronchi, bronchial sort of scenario? Well, basically, our bronchi in our lungs and bronchioles will relax and constrict as necessary, but they don't do it willy-nilly, right? There's a whole purpose to it, and it's controlled by our nervous system. So imagine your airway, the bronchi and bronchioles, are like flexible tubing, like garden hoses that carry air to your lungs. Now let's look at bronchodilation, which is sort of that expansion, right? This is where you need more air, like during exercise perhaps. So your body widens these tubes tubes, and that's called bronchodilation. And it's like turning the nozzle of a garden hose to make it wider, letting more air or water flow through. So this process is controlled by, you probably guessed it, the sympathetic nervous system. This is your fight or flight response. Think of it as your body opening up the roads to get more oxygen to your muscles and to do it fast. Like, imagine if you were in the jungle and you saw a lion. This is what would happen. There would be bronchodilation. Now, on the other hand, the opposite is bronchoconstriction. So this is where your airways will sort of tighten and get a little narrower, and it will partially close the hose, making it harder for air to go through. This happens under the opposite system, which is the parasympathetic nervous system, right? That's your rest and digest mode. However, sometimes during allergic reactions or asthma, this can also happen. So, in short, sympathetic system equals bronchodilation, which is more air. It's like opening the hose. Parasympathetic, on the other hand, is bronchoconstriction, less air. It's like pinching your nose, that sort of thing. So the nervous system is constantly adjusting the size of your airways depending on your body's needs. All right, now we're going to talk about the outer coverings of the lungs. Basically, something like cling film. That very household item that we might use to cover fruit or bowls or anything. It's sort of like that, but it's called pleura, and it's a serous membrane that surrounds the organ, in this case, the lungs. So these pleurae, there's actually two of them, and they're on both the right and left side of the lobes, right, the lungs. So the right lung has a pleura, as does the left. And so basically it's separated by the mediastinum, which you remember what the mediastinum is, right? It's like the space in the thorax that has all the organs and vessels, kind of where the cardiac notch is. So going back to the pleurae, there's two layers of pleurae. We've got the visceral pleura, which is right here, and this is the one that's going to be right next to the organ. So think about cling film. If you put cling film on, it's going to sort of wrap around the organ and go into every nook and cranny and fissure. That's what happens with visceral pleura. And the way to remember this is vital organ starts with V, as does visceral pleura. So visceral is always going to be right next to the organ in that we're discussing. All right, then we've got, in contrast, the parietal pleura. Now, this is the outer layer that connects to everything else. So it connects to the thoracic wall, the mediastinum, and the diaphragm. Now, the visceral and parietal pleura connect to each other in a spot called the hilum, or hilum, sorry. I combined helium and hilum. So that's, the hilum is a spot where the parietal and visceral pleura sort of come together. Okay, so what do pleurae do? Well, first of all, they have the cavity that's in between these two spaces. That's called the pleural cavity. And these two serous membranes, what they do, they perform two major functions. First of all, they produce pleural fluid and create this sort of separation between the major organs, right? If we didn't have pleura, everything would be a bit hodgepodgey, and we don't need that. So the pleural fluid that's secreted is actually secreted by mesothelial cells. And both layers will secrete this, and basically their function is to lubricate the surfaces, right? Because the lubrication is going to make things smoother and less friction. Because imagine if you had to encounter friction every time you took a breath, right? Because the lungs are going to rub against the other side, other parts of other organs and the walls of the cavity, and that can cause obviously friction and trauma. So that would not be good, right? Who would want to take a breath then? So this lubrication basically helps prevent trauma during breathing, but it also creates surface tension, because that helps maintain the position of the lungs against the thoracic wall. So it has somewhat of an adhesive characteristic also. So this adhesiveness also helps the lungs to enlarge and expand during ventilation, and then also allow it to fill with air, right? So just remember that. Basically, those are the main things that it does. You know, the other thing I want to mention is that pleura also, because they create this division between major organs, it prevents the spread of infection, right? Because say you've got infection in the, I don't know, diaphragm muscle. Because of the pleura, it's not going to sort of spread into the lungs because it creates that sort of barrier and boundary too. All right, that's all we have for pleura. In summary, I have a mind map for you with all the key features we talked about today, which if you're interested in downloading it, please do comment and let me know. Basically, this is a great tool if you're a visual learner, if you like to have everything in one spot. It sort of gives you more of a broader overview of what's going on in anatomy. So until next time, see you then. Bye.